You have exactly 24 hours. Those words hit Elena like a death sentence. She stood frozen in the sterile courtroom, her knuckles turning bone white as she clutched her purse, the judge's ultimatum ringing in her ears. Beside her, her ex-mother-in-law smoothed her expensive dress and whispered loud enough for the lawyers to hear. Say goodbye to him, Elena. He belongs to us now. It was the worst day of her life. Unless she could produce a husband and a mansion by 9 a.m. tomorrow, she would lose custody of her 6-year-old son forever. She was on her knees scrubbing the floor of a corporate tower, ready to give up hope, when a pair of $5,000 shoes stopped in front of her. The most powerful billionaire in the city looked down at the cleaning lady and made an offer that sounded like madness. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. Not the judge, not her ex-husband's family, and certainly not the board of directors trying to destroy him. But before I reveal his shocking offer, if you've ever needed a miracle, hit that like button right now. Subscribe for more stories that heal. Now let's go back. The rain, the ticking clock, and the billionaire who was about to change everything. The silence in the courtroom was heavy and suffocating, the kind of silence that precedes a natural disaster or a life sentence. Elena sat alone on the left side of the aisle, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned a stark, bone white. She was afraid to breathe, afraid that even the sound of an exhale would be used against her in this cold, sterile room where the fate of her entire world was being decided. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was entirely different. It smelled of expensive cologne and smug satisfaction. The Grant family, her ex-husband's parents, sat with the posture of royalty, their eyes fixed forward, refusing to even acknowledge the woman who had once been their daughter-in-law. They didn't need to look at her. They had paid a small fortune for a lawyer who was currently dismantling Elena's life, piece by piece, with the precision of a surgeon. Mr. Thorne, the Grant's attorney, adjusted his silk tie and leaned against the wooden railing, his voice smooth and practiced. He spoke about stability. He spoke about financial security. He spoke about appropriate environments for a young child. Every word was a calculated strike, designed to paint Elena not as a loving mother, but as a failure. He didn't mention the bedtime stories, the scraped knees kissed better, or the way Leo's face lit up when she walked into the room. No, in this room, love didn't matter. Only numbers mattered, and Elena's numbers were terrifyingly low. She wore her best blouse, a soft blue cotton that brought out her eyes, but she knew they could see the frayed stitching on the cuff. She knew they saw the scuff marks on her heels that she had tried to cover with marker. She was a single mother working 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, but in the eyes of the law, struggling was synonymous with unfitness. The lawyer turned to the judge, his expression feigning concern. He argued that a boy of 6 needed a father figure. He needed a legacy. He needed a home with a backyard, not a cramped apartment where the heating rattled and the windows drafted. Elena felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, hot and stinging, but she bit the inside of her cheek to stop them. She knew that crying would be seen as instability. She had to be stone, even as her heart was breaking. She looked at the empty chair beside her, wishing she could afford counsel that didn't come from a legal aid clinic, wishing she had someone, anyone, in her corner. But there was no one. It was just Elena against an empire of wealth. The judge, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a face etched with decades of cynical judgments, sighed as he looked over the file. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture that made Elena's stomach drop all the way to the floor. When he spoke, his voice was not unkind, which somehow made it worse. It was the voice of a man delivering a tragedy he viewed as a necessity. He acknowledged Elena's love for her son, Leo. He acknowledged that she was hardworking. But then came the word that ruins everything. However, the court, he explained, had to prioritize the long-term welfare of the child. The Grants had petitioned for full custody, citing her inability to provide a stable 2-parent household and a secure, permanent residence. Then, he delivered the ultimatum that stopped time, because the custody transfer paperwork had a processing delay of exactly 24 hours, and because Elena had technically never been unfit, Just under-resourced, he offered a loophole that sounded more like a cruel joke. To retain custody, she had to prove by the same time tomorrow that her circumstances had changed. She needed to present evidence of a stable, dual-income household, specifically, a marriage certificate, and a residence that met the court's square footage standards for a child. If she could not provide this within 24 hours, Leo would be handed over to the Grants permanently. The gavel banged down, a sound of finality that rang in her ears like a death knell. 24 hours. She had 24 hours to find a husband and a mansion, or she would lose the only person who made her life worth living. It was impossible. It was insane. As the court adjourned, Mrs. Grant finally looked at Elena. She didn't say a word. She simply adjusted her pearl necklace, offered a small, pitying smile that didn't reach her eyes, and walked out, her heels clicking a rhythm of victory on the marble floor. Elena remained frozen, the judge's words looping in her mind. Stumbling out of the courthouse, the world felt tilted. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind her, pushing her out into the gray, indifferent afternoon. As if the universe were mocking her, the sky opened up. Rain began to fall, not in a drizzle, but in a cold, relentless downpour that soaked through her thin blouse in seconds. She stood on the concrete steps, shivering, watching the Grant's sleek black limousine pull away from the curb, disappearing into the traffic. She was alone. She was drowning. The panic finally clawed its way up her throat, choking her. How could she possibly do this? Who would marry her? Where would she find a home? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a jarring vibration against her leg. She pulled it out with trembling wet hands, shielding the cracked screen from the rain. It was a notification from a temp agency app she had installed months ago and forgotten about. A high-priority request had just come in. A cleaning crew was short-staffed for an emergency shift at Vance Enterprises, the tallest, most intimidating skyscraper in the city. The pay was triple the normal rate because it was a last-minute rush. Elena stared at the screen. It wasn't a husband. It wasn't a house. It was just a few $100s. But it was money she could use to run away or maybe hire a better lawyer for an appeal. It was a lifeline, however thin. She wiped the rain from her eyes, gripped the phone, and started running toward the subway. She had no idea that she was running toward her destiny. Vance Enterprises was not just a building, it was a monument to untouchable power. The structure pierced the city skyline like a shard of black glass, reflecting the stormy clouds above while remaining impervious to them. Elena stood at the service entrance around the back, shivering as she waited for the security guard to buzz her in. The rain had plastered her hair to her cheeks, and her cheap flats were soaked through, squishing uncomfortably with every shift of her weight. When the buzzer finally sounded, it was a harsh, angry noise that made her jump. She hurried inside, trading the cold wetness of the alley for the refrigerated, sterile air of the skyscraper's underbelly. She was handed a gray smock that smelled faintly of industrial lemon and bleach, a uniform that was 3 sizes too big. It swallowed her slender frame, hiding her curves, her personality, and her humanity. As she pulled it over her head, she felt herself disappearing. This was the transaction. She gave them her labor, and in return, she became invisible. She grabbed the cleaning cart, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle, and pushed it toward the freight elevator. The wheels squeaked a rhythmic, mournful tune that seemed to echo the countdown ticking away in her head. 23 hours remaining. 23 hours until the gavel came down for the final time. Elena emerged into the main lobby, a cavernous space of polished Italian marble and towering abstract sculptures that looked like frozen explosions. The ceiling was so high it had its own weather system, and the air smelled of money, crisp, clean, and utterly indifferent to suffering. Men and women in bespoke suits moved across the floor with purposeful strides, their heels clicking sharp codes of importance. They were the masters of the universe, holding phones to their ears, discussing mergers and acquisitions that involved more money than Elena would see in 1,000 lifetimes. As she began to mop a streak of mud near the entrance, she realized she was a ghost to them. They looked through her, over her, and past her. If she were to scream, She doubted they would even turn their heads. Her mind, however, was far away from the marble floors. It was back in the small, drafty apartment where her son, Leo, was currently staying with a neighbor. She could see his face, the way his nose crinkled when he laughed, and the way he clutched his worn-out teddy bear when the thunder got too loud. The thought of the Grants taking her sweet, sensitive boy to a cold mansion where he would be raised by nannies and taught to look down on people like his mother, made bile rise in her throat. She scrubbed the floor harder, the mop moving in frantic, angry circles. She needed a miracle. She needed a husband and a house in less than a day. The absurdity of it made her want to laugh and vomit at the same time. This cleaning job would pay $200. It was nothing. It was a drop of water in a desert. But she couldn't stop. If she stopped moving, the terror would catch her. Suddenly, the ambient hum of the lobby changed. The air grew heavier, charged with a different kind of tension. The heavy glass doors of the private executive elevator slid open, and two men stepped out. The atmosphere around them seemed to warp, bending to their gravity. Elena, sensing the shift, instinctively pulled her cart toward a decorative pillar, trying to make herself even smaller, even more invisible. The older man was leaning on a cane, but he didn't use it for support. He used it like a weapon, tapping it aggressively against the stone floor. He had a shock of white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. This was the chairman. Beside him walked a younger man who looked like a storm contained in a suit. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of his dark jacket. His face was strikingly handsome but terrifyingly blank, his jaw set in a line of grim endurance. This was Adrian Vance. "I am tired of the excuses, Adrian," the older man snapped, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "The board is restless. The stock is fluctuating. They want stability. They want to know the Vance legacy is secure, not left to a bachelor who treats the company like a mistress. I have tripled the profits in 2 years. Adrian replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He didn't look at his grandfather. He looked straight ahead, his eyes like dark tunnels. "My performance is the only stability they need. Performance is fleeting," the chairman barked, stopping in the middle of the lobby, oblivious to the eyes darting toward them. "Perception is permanent. You turn 35 next week. The trust stipulations are clear. You marry, you settle down, and you present a unified front, or the control of this conglomerate reverts to the board. And you know who controls the board." Elena froze. She was witnessing a titan being brought to his knees. Adrian stopped walking. The muscle in his jaw feathered as he clenched his teeth. "You would burn your own bloodline for a photo op? I would do whatever is necessary to protect this company," the chairman hissed. "Fix it, Adrian. Find a wife or find a new job." The older man turned and marched toward the exit, leaving Adrian standing alone in the center of the lobby, radiating a cold, terrifying fury. Elena, mesmerized and terrified, realized too late that her mop bucket had leaked a small puddle of soapy water onto the pristine path. As Adrian turned sharply to storm back toward the elevators, his expensive leather shoe hit the slick spot. He didn't fall. His reflexes were too sharp for that. But he stumbled, his composure cracking for a fraction of a second. Elena gasped and lunged forward instinctively to catch him, her hands gripping the expensive wool of his sleeve. The collision was jarring. Her cleaning cart rattled, and a spray bottle clattered to the floor, the sound loud and violent in the hush of the lobby. Time stopped. Elena pulled her hands back as if she had touched fire. She was trembling, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had just assaulted the CEO. She had humiliated him moments after his grandfather had done the same. She was going to be fired. She was going to lose the $200. She was going to lose Leo. The tears she had been holding back since the courtroom finally spilled over, hot and humiliating, tracking through the non-existent makeup on her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, I didn't see. I'll clean it up. Please don't fire me. I need this. I really need this." She dropped to her knees, frantically using her rag to wipe his shoe, degrading herself in a way that made her soul ache. but she had no pride left to lose. She expected him to yell. She expected him to call security. She expected the cruelty of the courtroom to be repeated here in the lobby. But there was silence. She looked up, terrified, through her blurred vision. Adrian Vance was looking down at her. He wasn't looking at the wet floor. He wasn't looking at the smock. He was looking at her face. For the first time all day, someone was actually seeing her. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and currently filled with a strange mixture of curiosity and recognition. He saw the red rims of her eyes. He saw the sheer, unadulterated panic that went beyond a spilled bucket. He saw a desperation that mirrored the storm raging inside him. He didn't move away. He stood there, the most powerful man in the city, towering over the woman on her knees. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. Then, he crouched down. The movement sent a ripple of shock through the nearby staff, but Adrian ignored them. He was eye level with her now. The scent of rain and sandalwood wafted off him, overpowering the smell of bleach. He tilted his head slightly, studying her trembling lips. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask about the job. Instead, he asked a question that was so abrupt, so disjointed from the situation, that Elena stopped wiping his shoe and froze. "Do you trust the law?" he asked, his voice low and intense. The question hung in the air between them, absurd and piercing. "Do I trust the law?" Elena repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at this stranger, this titan of industry crouched on the marble floor in his $5,000 suit, and the dam finally broke. The professional veneer she had tried so hard to maintain shattered completely. She didn't see a CEO anymore. She saw another human being asking about the very system that was currently strangling her. "No," she choked out, a fresh wave of tears spilling over. "No, I don't trust it. The law is about to take my son away." The words tumbled out in a frantic rush, fueled by exhaustion and grief. I have less than 20 hours. The judge said I need a stable home. He said I need a husband. If I don't find a husband and a house by tomorrow morning, they're going to give my boy to people who hate him. So no, sir, I don't trust the law. The law is for people like you, not for people like me." She stopped, horrified by her own outburst. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes widening as she realized what she had just done. She had just unloaded her tragic life story onto the owner of the building she was cleaning. She braced herself for his disgust, for him to stand up and walk away from the hysterical cleaning lady. But Adrian didn't recoil. If anything, he leaned in closer. His eyes, which had been cold and distant moments ago, were now sharp and assessing. He was looking at her not with pity, but with the intense focus of a man who had just found the missing piece of a complex puzzle. He was used to women who played games, women who laughed too loudly at his jokes, who wore smiles that didn't reach their eyes, who wanted his money or his status but never offered anything real in return. Elena's vulnerability was raw, messy, and undeniably authentic. It was a stark contrast to the plastic world he inhabited, and it disarmed him completely. He stood up slowly, extending a hand toward her. It was a large, strong hand, steady as a rock. Elena stared at it, confused. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request, it was a command, but there was no malice in it. I have to finish this floor," Elena stammered, looking at her mop. "Leave it," Adrian said, his tone final. "You have a bigger problem than a dirty floor. And so do I." Elena took his hand. It was warm and calloused in unexpected places. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength and led her toward the private elevator. The whispers in the lobby rose to a fever pitch as the invisible woman was escorted into the Holy of Holies by the king himself. The elevator ride was silent and swift, ascending 50 floors in seconds. When the doors opened, Elena stepped into a world of intimidation and luxury. Adrian's office was larger than her entire apartment building. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the city battered by rain. Dark mahogany furniture, leather chairs, and modern art filled the space, screaming of power and isolation. Adrian walked behind his massive desk and didn't sit. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. You need a husband to keep your son, he stated, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. And I need a wife to keep my company. Elena blinked, her mind struggling to catch up. What? My grandfather. Adrian gestured vaguely toward the door. Controls the board. The stipulations of my inheritance require me to be married and settled by my 35th birthday to retain full control of Vance Enterprises. That birthday is next week. The board is threatening a vote of no confidence if I don't produce a spouse immediately. He walked around the desk and leaned against the front of it, crossing his arms. I don't have time for dating. I don't have the patience for romance. I need a partner who understands the stakes. I need a business arrangement. He looked her dead in the eye. I will be your husband. I will provide the home, the stability, and the legal defense you need to keep your son. In exchange, you will be my wife. You will wear the ring, attend the events, and help me secure my legacy. The room spun. Elena felt like she had stepped into a fever dream. A billionaire was proposing marriage to her, not for love, but for survival. It was a transaction, a contract. You want to marry me? She whispered. But you don't know me. I'm nobody. You are a mother who would do anything for her child. Adrian corrected her, his voice dropping an octave. That makes you more real than anyone else I know. And right now, Elena, I don't need a socialite. I need an ally. The tension in the room was palpable. Was he using her? Absolutely. Was this dangerous? Probably. This man was a stranger, powerful and imposing. But then, Elena's hand drifted to the cheap silver locket around her neck. She popped it open with her thumb. Inside was a tiny, grainy photo of Leo, smiling with a gap-toothed grin. She thought of the Grants. She thought of the cold, sterile room they would put him in. She thought of never tucking him in again. Adrian watched her struggle. He didn't push. He just waited, his presence filling the room. He was offering her a lifeline, a golden parachute out of her nightmare. But it came with a price, her freedom, her name, and her life entangled with his. Elena looked up, snapping the locket shut. Her hands were still trembling, but her eyes were fierce. If I do this, if I agree, you promise that Leo stays with me? You promise you won't let them take him? I have the best lawyers in the country on retainer, Adrian said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. If you are my wife, no one touches your son. That is a promise. Elena took a deep, shuddering breath. Okay, she said. I'll do it. The moment the words left her lips, the energy in the room shifted from negotiation to action. Adrian nodded once, sharp and decisive. He reached for the sleek black phone on his desk and punched a single button. Get the legal team, he barked into the receiver. And tell the pilot to prepare the jet. We're going to Las Vegas. He hung up and looked at Elena. She was standing there in her oversized gray cleaning smock, her hair frizzy from the humidity, looking terrified and brave all at once. His gaze traveled down to her feet. He saw the cheap, worn-out flats, soaked through with rainwater, the cardboard soles likely disintegrating. For a second, the mask of the ruthless CEO slipped. A flicker of something soft, something like regret or protectiveness, passed through his eyes. He wasn't just acquiring a business asset. He was rescuing someone. And strangely, he felt like she might be rescuing him too. Let's go, he said, his voice gentler now. We have a plane to catch. And we need to get you some dry shoes. The next few hours blurred into a montage of kinetic energy and surreal luxury that Elena couldn't fully comprehend. From the rain-slicked streets of the city, she was whisked into the back of a black SUV that smelled of leather and silence. Then came the private airstrip, the roar of jet engines, and the ascent above the storm clouds into a sky that was shockingly, peacefully blue. She sat across from Adrian in the cabin, clutching a glass of sparkling water she was too nervous to drink. He was on his phone the entire time, speaking in rapid-fire legalese, orchestrating the logistics of their sudden union with the efficiency of a general commanding a war. When they landed in Las Vegas, the sun was setting, painting the desert sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange. A car was waiting on the tarmac. Adrian didn't take her to a drive-through chapel with an Elvis impersonator. Instead, the car glided toward a high-end boutique hotel that had been alerted to their arrival. "We have 30 minutes, Adrian said, checking his watch as they entered a private suite where a stylist was already waiting. "Get changed. The cleaning uniform stays here." Elena stood in front of a mirror surrounded by racks of designer clothing. The stylist, a brisk woman with no time for questions, handed her a dress. It wasn't a sprawling ball gown. There was no time for that, but a sleek, knee-length dress in a soft cream silk. It was simple, elegant, and undoubtedly cost more than Elena's entire life's earnings. As she slipped it on, the fabric cool against her skin, she caught her reflection. The cleaning lady was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked fragile but poised. The transformation was jarring. It was a Cinderella moment, but without the fairy godmother's magic wand. This was magic bought with power and necessity. She felt like an imposter in her own skin, a fraud wrapped in silk. Adrian was waiting in the lobby. He had changed into a fresh suit, dark charcoal this time, crisp and impeccable. When Elena stepped off the elevator, he stopped checking his emails. His gaze swept over her, taking in the dress, her hair, which had been quickly smoothed back, and the simple heels that replaced her ruined flats. He didn't smile, but his eyes lingered for a moment longer than necessary. He offered his arm. "You look appropriate," he said. It was a business compliment, but the tone was softer than his words. They were married in a private chapel attached to the hotel, devoid of guests, flowers, or music. Just a civil officiant, a witness provided by the hotel, and the two of them. The air conditioning hummed a low drone, the only sound in the room besides the officiant's monotone voice. When it came time for the vows, Elena's hands were shaking so badly she thought she might drop the simple platinum band Adrian had produced from his pocket. She looked up at him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was madness. She was marrying a stranger. She was lying to the world. But then Adrian took her trembling hands in his. His grip was firm, grounding her. He looked down at her, and for the first time since they met, he wasn't looking at a problem to be solved. He was looking at her. Adrian," he said, his voice surprisingly deep and steady, devoid of the corporate coldness she expected. "Take you, Elena, to be my wife." He didn't recite flowery poetry. He didn't promise eternal passion. But then he deviated from the standard script. He looked intently into her eyes, squeezing her hands slightly. "I promise to honor our agreement. I promise to provide for you. And I promise to protect you." The word protect hung in the air, heavy and significant. It wasn't just a legal term. It sounded like an oath. For years, Elena had been the protector, shielding Leo from poverty, from his father's neglect, and from the world's cruelty. She had been the shield, taking every blow. Hearing someone else, someone this powerful, say they would protect her sent a shiver through her body that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was a feeling of safety, foreign and overwhelming. "I promise," she whispered back, her voice barely audible, slipping the ring onto his finger. "I promise, by the power vested in me." The officiant droned on, but Elena barely heard him. She was lost in the sensation of Adrian's thumb brushing over her knuckles. The moment the paperwork was signed, the spell broke. The clock in the chapel read 4 a.m. They had to be back in the city by 9 a.m. for the court hearing. The rush back to the jet was frantic. The flight back was silent, but the tension had shifted. It was no longer the tension of strangers but of conspirators. They were in this together now. They landed with less than an hour to spare. The car ride to the courthouse was a blur of traffic and anxiety. Elena clutched the marriage certificate in a protective folder against her chest as if it were a shield. As the courthouse came into view, the colossal stone steps looming ahead, the reality of what they were about to do crashed down on her. The car stopped. Adrian turned to her before opening the door. His face had shuddered again. The soft look from the chapel was gone, replaced by the impenetrable mask of the CEO. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black card. "Here," he said, pressing it into her hand. "The pin is your birth year. Buy Leo whatever he needs. Clothes, toys, food. Don't hesitate." Elena looked at the card, then at him. "Adrian, we have a deal, Elena," He cut her off, his voice cool and distant. "This is part of it. Let's go. We have a judge to convince." He opened the door and stepped out into the morning light, leaving her stunned in the back seat for a split second. Why the sudden coldness? Why did he pull away the moment the vow was real? It was as if the act of promising protection had terrified him more than it had terrified her. He was retreating behind his walls, becoming the billionaire again, leaving the husband back in Vegas. Elena took a deep breath, gripped the card and the certificate, and stepped out to join him. She had a role to play, and she would play it perfectly, for Leo. The courtroom was exactly as they had left it 24 hours ago, cold, sterile, and suffocating. The air smelled of floor wax and impending doom. On the right side of the aisle, the Grant family was practically vibrating with anticipation. Mrs. Grant sat in the front row, checking her diamond-encrusted watch with an exaggerated sigh. Beside her, a social worker sat with a clipboard, ready to initiate the transfer of custody. They had already won in their minds. They knew Elena had no money, no connections, and certainly no husband. They were just waiting for the clock to run out so they could collect their prize, Leo, and erase Elena from his life forever. Mr. Thorne, their lawyer, was leaning back in his chair, sharing a jovial whisper with his client. He didn't even look at the door. Why would he? The deadline was 5 minutes away. Elena was likely crying in a hallway somewhere, defeated. At exactly 8:58 a.m., the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They swung wide with a force that commanded attention. The sound echoed off the high ceilings, silencing the murmurs in the room. Elena stepped through the threshold. But it wasn't Elena who had stumbled out into the rain yesterday. She wore the cream silk dress from Vegas, her hair swept back in an elegant twist. She stood tall, her chin lifted, radiating a quiet, desperate dignity. But it wasn't just her appearance that sucked the air out of the room. It was the man whose arm she was holding. Adrian Vance walked beside her, his presence dominating the space instantly. In a room full of local lawyers and petty bureaucrats, Adrian was a shark in a tank of goldfish. He wore his power like a second skin. His tailored charcoal suit cost more than the judge's annual salary. His expression was a terrifying calm, eyes sweeping over the room with a look of absolute authority. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The court stenographer stopped typing. Mr. Thorne's chair legs slammed onto the floor as he sat up, his jaw practically unhinging. Mrs. Grant's smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending horror. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear a hallucination. That was Adrian Vance. Adrian Vance. What was he doing with the cleaning lady? They walked down the center aisle, the sound of their footsteps perfectly synchronized. Elena felt the eyes burning into her, but Adrian's arm was a solid bar of steel beneath her hand, grounding her. They reached the defendant's table and stood before the bench just as the judge entered from his chambers. Case 409, Grant vs. Rossi, the bailiff announced, his voice faltering slightly as he recognized the billionaire. The judge settled into his chair, looked at the clock, and then down at Elena. "Ms. Rossi," he began, "the court's deadline has arrived. Unless you can present evidence of a significant change in circumstances, Your Honor." Adrian's voice cut through the room. It was deep and resonant, and didn't require shouting to be heard. "My wife goes by Mrs. Vance now." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear Mrs. Grant's pearl necklace rattle as she clutched it in shock. Adrian stepped forward, placing a leather folder on the judge's bench. "You asked for stability. You asked for a secure home? Included in this file is a marriage certificate, signed and filed in the state of Nevada as of this morning. Also included is the deed to my primary residence in exclusivity, a 12-bedroom estate in the Heights, where Leo will have his own wing. And finally, financial statements guaranteeing Leo's education and trust fund." He turned slightly, casting a look of icy disdain toward the Grant family lawyer. "I trust this meets the court's definition of a stable environment?" The judge opened the folder. He looked at the marriage certificate. He looked at the financial statements. His eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. He looked at Mr. Thorne, who was currently stammering, his face a blotchy red. "Your Honor," Thorne squeaked. This is preposterous. A marriage less than a day old? This is clearly a sham. A stunt." "Careful, counselor," Adrian warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You are questioning the legitimacy of my marriage and my integrity. I would think very carefully before you finish that sentence." The threat was implicit but clear. "I can buy your firm and shut it down before lunch." Thorne snapped his mouth shut. The judge cleared his throat. "The court's order was specific. Ms. Rose, Mrs. Vance was to provide proof of a husband and a home. The evidence before me is overwhelming." He looked at the Grants, who were pale and silent. "The petition for custody transfer is denied. Full custody remains with the mother. Case closed." The gavel banged. The sound was like a gunshot that shattered Elena's tension. The relief hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her knees buckled. She didn't fall to the floor, though. She fell into Adrian. He caught her instantly, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. For a moment, the contract didn't exist. The business deal didn't exist. She buried her face in his jacket, sobbing in sheer, hysterical relief, and he held her. He actually held her tight, his hand coming up to shield the back of her head from the prying eyes of the room. It was a protective, possessive embrace that shocked everyone, including Adrian himself. They turned to leave, a united front. As they passed the gallery, Mrs. Grant stood up, her face twisted in bitterness. She leaned in as Adrian passed, her voice a poisonous hiss meant only for him. "You don't know what you've walked into, Mr. Vance," she whispered, her eyes darting hatefully toward Elena. "She's damaged goods. She'll ruin you just like she ruined my son." Elena didn't hear it. She was too busy wiping her tears. But Adrian heard. He paused. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He looked at the spiteful woman, then down at Elena, who was clinging to his arm like it was the only solid thing in the world. Did he believe the old woman? A flicker of doubt passed through his eyes, the cold calculation returning. He didn't reply. He simply tightened his grip on Elena's arm and marched her out of the courtroom, the warning echoing in his mind. The courtroom victory felt like the end, but it was only the beginning of the real danger. When the board of directors dug up Elena's past, Adrian had to make a choice that would shock everyone. Watch closely, because the mistake Elena makes at the mansion almost cost her the love of her life. The move happened so quickly it felt like a kidnapping, though a very luxurious one. By the afternoon, a moving truck far too large for their meager possessions had transported Elena and Leo's few boxes to the Vance estate. The mansion sat on a hill overlooking the city, a sprawling fortress of stone and glass surrounded by iron gates and manicured gardens that looked too perfect to be real. When the front doors opened, the visual contrast was heartbreaking. The foyer was a cathedral of marble, with a chandelier that likely cost more than the entire neighborhood Elena had grown up in. In the center of this cavernous space stood Leo. He was small for his age, wearing his favorite dinosaur t-shirt and clutching Mr. Bear, a teddy bear with one eye missing and stuffing leaking from its paw. He looked like a tiny, colorful speck in a world of monochrome luxury. He gripped Elena's hand tightly, his eyes wide with apprehension. "Is this a museum, Mommy?" Leo whispered, his voice echoing slightly. "No, baby," Elena soothed, squeezing his hand. This is home now." The word tasted strange on her tongue. Elena braced herself for the reality of the contract. She expected Adrian to retreat to his office, to establish boundaries, and to treat them like roommates he was forced to tolerate. She expected the Ice King she had heard about in the tabloids. But then Adrian walked in. He had shed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a man trying to figure out how to navigate his own house with guests in it. He stopped when he saw Leo. The boy shrank back behind Elena's leg, peeking out with one eye. Adrian didn't loom over him. He didn't use his CEO voice. Instead, he did something that made Elena's breath catch. He knelt down on one knee on the hard marble floor, bringing himself to Leo's eye level. He didn't force a smile, but his expression was open, devoid of the hardness he showed the world. Hello, Leo, Adrian said softly. I'm Adrian. Leo blinked. Are you the boss? A corner of Adrian's mouth quirked up. Sometimes, but mostly I just live here. And I heard you like cars. Leo's eyes lit up. Fast ones? The fastest. Adrian nodded. Would you like to see them? Elena watched, stunned, as her shy, anxious son slowly stepped out from behind her leg. He nodded vigorously. Adrian stood up and extended a hand, not to shake, but offering it palm open, waiting for Leo to initiate. Leo hesitated for a second, then placed his small hand into Adrian's large one. They walked off toward the library, leaving Elena standing alone in the foyer. She followed quietly, hovering in the doorway of the study. She watched as Adrian lifted Leo up so he could see the top shelf of a glass display case filled with intricate vintage model cars. Adrian, the man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers, was patiently explaining the difference between a V8 and a V12 engine to a 6-year-old. His voice was gentle and patient. He wasn't talking down to Leo, he was talking to him. It was in the small moments over the next few days that the house began to feel different. The silence of the mansion was broken by the sound of cartoons in the morning and Leo's laughter echoing down the halls. Elena saw a side of Adrian that the tabloids never captured. She saw him pause outside the kitchen when he smelled her cooking, simple pasta dishes that filled the sterile house with the scent of garlic and warmth. She saw him awkwardly leave a new, high-tech telescope in Leo's room without a note, then watch from the balcony as Leo discovered it with squeals of joy. One evening, Elena was folding laundry in the living room, something the staff usually did, but she insisted on doing herself to feel useful. Adrian was on the sofa, reading a report. It was a domestic scene, quiet and intimate. She looked at him, really looked at him. The way the lamplight hit his profile, the tired lines around his eyes that he hid so well. She realized with a pang of empathy that this man, despite his billions, was profoundly lonely. This house had been a mausoleum before they arrived. Now it has life. Thank you, she said softly, breaking the silence. Adrian looked up, startled. For what? For the telescope. For being kind to him. You don't have to do that. It's not in the contract. Adrian looked back down at his papers, his lashes casting shadows on his cheeks. He's a good kid, Elena. He deserves to look at the stars. The vulnerability in his voice was fleeting, but it was there. The air between them crackled with a sudden, unspoken tension. It wasn't sexual, not yet, but it was intimate. It was the tension of two lonely people recognizing each other in the dark. Later that night, long after Leo had gone to sleep, Elena woke up thirsty. She padded barefoot down the hallway toward the kitchen. As she passed Adrian's private study, she saw the door ajar and a sliver of light spilling out. She peeked inside. Adrian was sitting at his desk, but he wasn't working. He was staring at an old, yellowed photograph and a stack of crumpled documents. His head was in his hands, his posture one of utter defeat. He looked haunted. Elena took a step forward, about to knock, but Adrian suddenly stiffened. He sensed her presence. He quickly swept the papers into a drawer and slammed it shut, locking it with a key he kept around his neck. When he turned to the door, the mask was back firmly in place. Is something wrong? He asked, his voice sharp. No, Elena stammered, stepping back into the shadows. Just getting water. She hurried away, her heart racing. What was in those papers? Why did he look so broken? As the camera pans into the room, staying on Adrian, he unlocks the drawer again. He pulls out the photo. It's a picture of a young boy, himself, standing alone outside a boarding school, crying. Next to it is a court document, termination of parental rights. The audience realizes the truth. Adrian wasn't just saving Leo from the system. He was saving the boy he used to be. He is the protector because he never had one. And that secret pain is the wall he keeps between himself and Elena. But the wedding in Vegas was the easy part. What happened when they walked into the charity gala would test their fake marriage in front of the entire city. And the secret Adrian was hiding in his desk drawer? It threatened to ruin everything they were building. The invitation lay on the kitchen counter like a declaration of war. It was heavy cardstock, embossed with gold leaf, the annual Vance Foundation Charity Gala. This wasn't just a party. It was the social event of the season, a gathering of the city's elite, the press, and the board members who still viewed Elena as a liability. This was her public debut as Mrs. Adrian Vance. Elena stared at it, her stomach twisting into tight knots. "I can't do this," she whispered to the empty room. She knew how to scrub floors. She knew how to stretch a dollar. She did not know how to navigate a room full of sharks wearing silk and diamonds. She was terrified of embarrassing Adrian, of proving the Grants right, and of being exposed as the imposter she felt she was. But Adrian didn't give her a choice. "You are my wife," he said simply over breakfast, not looking up from his tablet. "This is part of the role. You will be fine." The afternoon of the gala, the mansion was invaded by a squadron of stylists. Racks of gowns, cases of jewelry, and an army of makeup artists filled the master's suite. Elena stood like a mannequin as they pulled, pinned, and painted. She felt disconnected from her own body, watching the transformation in the mirror with wide, unbelieving eyes. When they were finished, the woman staring back was unrecognizable. She wore a floor-length gown of deep emerald velvet that hugged her curves and pooled around her feet. It was modest yet undeniably sensuous, the dark green making her eyes pop and her skin glow. Her hair was swept up in a loose, romantic chignon, with tendrils framing her face. She looked regal. She looked like she belonged. The lead stylist held up a diamond necklace, a stunning cascade of stones that glittered under the vanity lights. "The final touch, Mrs. Vance." Before the stylist could clasp it, the door opened. Adrian walked in. He was already in his tuxedo, looking devastatingly handsome. He paused, his breath hitching audibly as he saw her. His eyes traveled from the hem of her gown to her face, a slow, heated appraisal that made Elena's skin prickle. The room went silent. "Leave us," Adrian commanded softly. The stylist scurried out, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The door clicked shut, leaving them alone in the heavy silence. Adrian walked toward her, taking the necklace from the vanity. He moved behind her, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Lift your hair," he murmured, his voice a low rumble near her ear. Elena obeyed, her hands trembling as she swept the hair off her neck. Adrian stepped closer. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin of her nape as he positioned the necklace. The touch was electric, sending a jolt straight down her spine. He took his time, his breath ghosting over her shoulder. The intimacy of the moment was suffocating and intoxicating. This wasn't part of the contract. This was something else entirely. He clasped the necklace but didn't pull away immediately. He met her gaze in the mirror. "You are breathtaking, Elena," he said. The sincerity in his eyes stripped away her fear. For the first time, she didn't feel like a cleaner playing dress-up. She felt powerful. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most historic hotel. The moment they arrived, flashbulbs erupted like a strobe light storm. Adrian took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers, and led her onto the red carpet. He was her anchor in the chaos. Inside, the room was a sea of luxury. Waiters circulated with champagne, and a live orchestra played softly. But as they moved through the crowd, the whispers began. The society women, with their frozen faces and sharp eyes, watched Elena like hawks. "That's her?" someone whispered loudly. "The maid? I heard she trapped him," another murmured. Elena kept her head high, gripping Adrian's hand tighter. Then, a woman in a red dress approached them. This was Vanessa, a socialite who had made no secret of her intention to marry Adrian for years. She smiled, but her eyes were cold daggers. "Adrian, darling," Vanessa purred, ignoring Elena entirely. "We were all so shocked by your sudden news." She finally turned to Elena, her smile widening into a sneer. "And you must be Elena. Tell me, is it true what they say? That you were scrubbing the floors of his building just last week? It must be so overwhelming for you, being around so much sophistication." The circle of people around them went silent, waiting for the humiliation, waiting for the gutter rat to scurry away. Elena felt the sting of tears, but then she thought of Leo. She thought of the courtroom. She thought of the promise she made to herself to be strong. She looked Vanessa in the eye. "It is true," Elena said, her voice clear and steady. "I was cleaning floors. I was working 2 jobs to feed my son. I'm not ashamed of hard work, Vanessa. I would scrub every floor in the city if it meant keeping my child safe. I suppose that's the difference between us. I know the value of earning my place." A stunned silence followed. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then Adrian laughed. It was a genuine, rich sound. He pulled Elena closer, wrapping his arm possessively around her waist. "That," he announced to the circle of onlookers, his voice ringing with pride, "is exactly why I married her. My wife has more integrity in her little finger than this entire room has in its bank accounts." He looked down at Elena with a look of such intense admiration that her heart skipped a beat. He had publicly claimed her. He had validated her existence, her struggle, and her worth. The women in the circle looked down, ashamed. Vanessa retreated into the crowd. "Dance with me," Adrian whispered. He led her to the dance floor as the orchestra swelled into a waltz. He pulled her close, his hand firm on the small of her back. They moved together effortlessly, the world falling away. Elena looked up at him, feeling a surge of emotion that terrified her. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was love. She was falling in love with her husband. Adrian stared down at her, his eyes dark with desire. The adrenaline of her defense, the beauty of the moment, and the scent of her perfume, it was breaking his resolve. The walls he had built were crumbling. He leaned in. His gaze dropped to her lips. He lowered his head slowly, the rest of the room blurring into background noise. Elena's breath hitched. She tilted her head back, her lips parting slightly, inviting him in. "Kiss me," she pleaded silently. "Make this real." His lips were inches from hers. She could feel his warmth. The anticipation was agonizing, a sweet torture. Then, abruptly, Adrian froze. His eyes widened slightly, as if waking from a trance. He remembered the contract. He remembered the danger of letting someone in. He remembered the secret in his desk drawer. He pulled back sharply, clearing his throat and looking away. "The song is ending," he said, his voice strained and formal. "We should greet the board members." He released her and stepped back, leaving a cold space between them. Elena stood there on the dance floor, her heart plummeting. The rejection was more painful than Vanessa's insults. He had almost let himself feel, but the fear had won. She watched his broad back as he walked toward a group of old men, feeling more alone in the crowded ballroom than she ever had in her empty apartment. The fairy tale had a crack in it, and she didn't know if it could be fixed. In the weeks following the gala, the lines between reality and pretense began to blur until they were almost invisible. The Vance mansion, once a cold fortress of solitude, had thawed into a home. Breakfasts were no longer silent affairs over tablets and newspapers. They were messy, noisy events involving Leo's spilled juice and shared laughter over burnt toast. Evenings were spent in the living room, with Adrian teaching Leo how to play chess while Elena read nearby, stealing glances at her husband, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the gentle way he high-fived Leo when the boy made a good move. They were a family in everything but name. The contract lay in a safe somewhere, gathering dust, ignored by hearts that were slowly beating in sync. But happiness, in their world, was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the machinations of power. The storm broke on a Tuesday afternoon. Elena was out picking up Leo from his new private school when the board of directors convened an emergency meeting. The chairman, Adrian's grandfather, sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of disappointment. Beside him lay a dossier thick with photos and documents. It was Elena's past, dug up and distorted by the grants and fed to the board. There were photos of her scrubbing floors, exaggerated accounts of her financial debts, and scandalous, fabricated rumors about her promiscuity and unfitness as a mother. "This is a liability, Adrian," one of the board members sneered, tossing a photo of Elena in her cleaning uniform onto the polished mahogany table. "We cannot have the Vance legacy attached to this. The stock dropped 2 points this morning based on the rumors. You need to cut ties. An annulment. Immediately." Adrian stood up, his hands balling into fists. "She is my wife, and she is worth 10 of you. Sentimentality is expensive," the chairman cut in coldly. "We have the votes, Adrian. Annul the marriage by tomorrow, or we trigger the morality clause in the trust. You lose the CEO position. You lose the company. You lose everything you've worked for your entire life." Adrian stormed out of the meeting, fury radiating off him in waves. He refused to buckle. He refused to lose her. But the board was relentless. They had already drawn up the annulment papers and had a courier deliver them to his home office, assuming he would see reason. Elena arrived home an hour later, humming a tune, her heart light. She went to Adrian's study to leave him a surprise, a drawing Leo had made of the three of them labeled, "My family." The door was open. On the center of his desk, stark and white against the dark wood, lay a thick envelope labeled "Petition for Annulment." Her breath hitched. She approached the desk slowly, her hands trembling as she opened the folder. The legal language was brutal: fraud, misrepresentation, irretrievable breakdown. The date for filing is tomorrow. She didn't know the board had sent it. She didn't know Adrian had stormed out, refusing to sign it. All she saw were the papers. All she saw was the confirmation of her deepest insecurity. She was a temporary fix, a problem to be solved. Now that he had secured his position for a few weeks, he was discarding her. The tenderness, the gala, the chess games, it was all just part of the performance. The pain was physical, a sharp knife twisting in her chest. She sank onto the chair, clutching the papers. He was choosing his company. Of course he was. He was Adrian Vance. She was just the cleaning lady he had pitied. But then, a different thought took root. If he stayed married to her, the scandal the papers mentioned would ruin him. The dossier on the desk detailed the damage her reputation was doing to his stock. She was poison to his legacy. If she stayed, she destroyed him. If she left, she saved him. She loved him enough to break her own heart. Elena wiped her tears, her resolve hardening into a cold, diamond-like strength. She wouldn't wait for him to kick her out. She would leave with her dignity intact. She went to her room and pulled out the old duffel bag she had arrived with. She packed only what they came with. No designer clothes, no jewelry, not even the black card. She woke Leo up gently. "Is it an adventure, Mommy?" he asked sleepily. "Yes, baby," she whispered, her voice cracking. "A quiet adventure." She wrote a note and left it on the pillow. "You gave us everything. I won't take your future away. Thank you for saving us. Goodbye." She took Leo's hand and slipped out the back service entrance, vanishing into the night just as the first drops of rain began to fall, echoing the day they met. 2 hours later, Adrian's car screeched into the driveway. He slammed the door and ran into the house, ready to tell Elena that he would burn the company to the ground before he signed those papers. He was ready to fight the world for her. "Elena!" he called out, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. Silence. "Leo!" He ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. He burst into their room. The closet was open. The expensive dresses hung untouched. The jewelry box was full. But the duffel bag was gone. The teddy bear was gone. He saw the note on the pillow. He walked over, his legs feeling heavy as lead, and picked it up. As he read her scrawled handwriting, the realization hit him like a physical blow. She thought he wanted this. She had left to save him. A primal, agonized roar ripped from his throat. Ideally, he was the Ice King, the man of control. But in that empty room, holding the farewell note of the only woman who had ever loved him for him, Adrian Vance shattered. He swept the lamp off the bedside table, the crash of glass satisfyingly violent. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He was a man who had just lost his heart, and he would tear the city apart to get it back. She thought she was leaving to save him, but she didn't know the truth about his childhood. What Adrian does when he finds that empty room will break your heart and put it back together again. The silence in the mansion was louder than the storm raging outside. It was an oppressive, heavy silence that pressed against Adrian's chest, making it impossible to breathe. He stood in the center of Leo's room, staring at the empty space on the shelf where the toy cars used to be. The telescope stood by the window, pointing blindly at the rain-soaked sky. Without them, this wasn't a home. It was just a collection of expensive furniture and cold stone. It was a museum of a life he didn't want anymore. He didn't care about the board. He didn't care about the stock price. He didn't care about the legacy his grandfather held over his head like a guillotine. The clarity was sudden and absolute. He had spent his entire life building a fortress of power to keep himself safe, to ensure he never felt the helplessness of his childhood again. But Elena and Leo had breached that fortress not with force, but with warmth. And now that they were gone, the fortress felt like a prison. Adrian pulled out his phone. He didn't call his lawyer. He called his head of security. "Find them," he ordered, his voice raw and terrifyingly calm. "Track her phone. Check every motel within a 50-mile radius. I don't care what it costs. Find my wife." It took 45 minutes. They were at the Starlight Motel on the outskirts of the city, a dilapidated roadside place with flickering neon signs and peeling paint. It was the kind of place people went to disappear. Adrian didn't wait for a driver. He took the sports car, driving through the rain with a reckless speed that matched the pounding of his heart. When he pulled into the motel parking lot, the contrast was jarring. His sleek, six-figure car parked next to rusted sedans and dumpsters. He found room 104 and pounded on the door. "Elena! Open the door!" Inside, Elena froze. She was sitting on the edge of the sagging mattress, watching Leo sleep. She had been crying for hours. Hearing his voice, so desperate, so angry, sent a jolt of panic through her. Had she taken something she shouldn't have? Was he here to ensure she stayed gone? She opened the door a crack, the safety chains still on. "Adrian? You shouldn't be here. Go back. Go save your company. Open the damn door, Elena," he demanded, his eyes dark and wild, wet with rain. She unhooked the chain with trembling fingers and opened the door. He pushed past her, bringing the smell of rain and ozone into the stale room. He looked around the dingy space, the stained carpet, the flickering lamp, and then looked at her. She looked small, defeated, and heartbroken. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why did you run?" "I saw the papers," Elena sobbed, the fight leaving her. "I saw what the board sent. I'm ruining you, Adrian. The scandal, my past. I'm a liability. I'm just a cleaner. You're a king. I left so you could keep your kingdom. I left because I love you too much to be the reason you lose everything." The confession hung in the air. "I love you." Adrian stared at her, stunned. She wasn't leaving because she hated him. She was leaving to save him. She was sacrificing her own safety, her own happiness, just to protect his legacy. It was the most selfless thing anyone had ever done for him. In a world where everyone wanted a piece of him, she was the only one trying to give him peace. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the annulment papers he had grabbed from his desk. Elena flinched, expecting him to hand them to her to sign. Instead, Adrian gripped the thick stack of documents in both hands. With a grunt of effort, he ripped them in half, then in quarters. He threw the confetti of legal destruction onto the cheap motel carpet. "I don't want the kingdom," he said, stepping closer, his voice fierce and steady. "Not if it means ruling it alone. Not if it means losing you. But the company," Elena stammered, looking at the torn papers. "Your grandfather, trust. Let them have it," Adrian said, closing the distance between them. He reached out and cupped her face in his wet hands, his thumbs stroking her tear-stained cheeks. "Let them take the building. Let them take the money. I can build another company. I can make more money. But I cannot find another you. I cannot find another Leo." He looked deep into her eyes, stripping away every defense he had left. "You taught me that a home isn't square footage or marble floors. It's people. You and that boy. You are the only home I have ever known. I was a protector because I had to be. But you saved me, Elena. You saved me from a life of cold, empty success." "Adrian," she whispered, overwhelmed. "I'm not here as the CEO," he vowed, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm here as your husband, for real. No contract. No deadline. Just us. I will be your husband even if we have to live in a place like this. But I am never letting you go again. Elena sobbed and threw her arms around his neck. Adrian buried his face in her hair, holding her so tight it hurt, anchoring himself to her. They stood there in the dingy motel room, surrounded by the wreckage of a contract that had turned into a lifeline, finally safe in each other's arms. The emotional peak was palpable. The billionaire had chosen love over power. Cinderella had saved the prince. But the world outside wasn't done with them yet. Just as their breathing slowed, just as Adrian pulled back to finally kiss her, a real kiss, full of promise and passion, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. He sighed, pulling it out to silence it. He looked at the screen and froze. The caller ID read Chairman Vance. "It's him," Adrian said, his expression hardening. He answered, putting it on speaker so Elena could hear. "I saw the security footage from your office, Adrian." The chairman's voice rasped, cold and metallic. "I saw you destroy the papers. I assume you are with her." "I am," Adrian said defiantly. "And I'm not leaving her." "Then you leave me no choice," the chairman said. "Meet me at the office in 1 hour. If you want to keep your family, you need to hear what I have to say. The board is moving to liquidate your assets as we speak. You have 1 hour before you lose everything." The line went dead. Adrian looked at Elena. The fear was back in her eyes. "We go together," she said firmly, gripping his hand. "If we lose everything, we lose it together." Adrian nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. Together. They walked out to the car, leaving the torn papers on the floor. The final battle was waiting. The elevator ride to the top floor of Vance Enterprises was silent, but it wasn't the silence of fear that had plagued Elena earlier. It was the silence of unity. Adrian held her hand so tightly his knuckles were white, but his touch was warm. When the heavy double doors to the boardroom swung open, the air inside was thick with judgment. The chairman sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by 12 board members who looked like vultures waiting for a carcass. "You're late," the chairman grunted, tapping his watch. "I was attending to what matters," Adrian replied, his voice projecting a calm authority that made several members sit up straighter. He didn't sit down. He guided Elena to stand beside him, presenting a united front. "You are throwing away $1 billion legacy for a cleaner," a board member scoffed, tossing a pen onto the table. "The investors are panicked, Adrian. This is a PR disaster." "No," Adrian's voice boomed, stopping the murmurs instantly. "I am securing it." He looked around the room, making eye contact with every skeptic. "You want stability? You want trust? You think the public trusts a man who discards people like assets?" Yes, Elena cleaned floors. She worked herself to the bone to keep a family alive against impossible odds. That is not a liability. That is resilience. That is the kind of integrity this company has been missing. He looked at Elena, his eyes softening, before turning his steel gaze back to his grandfather. "My wife has taught me that value isn't just a line item on a spreadsheet. If you want me as CEO, you get the man she made me. You get the husband. You get the father. If not, I will walk away right now. And I take my shares, my talent, and my family with me." The silence that followed was heavy. The chairman stared at Adrian, analyzing him. He saw something new, not the obedient, hollow grandson he had bullied for years, but a man of unshakable conviction. He looked at the livestock ticker on the wall. Social media was already buzzing about the romantic rescue at the motel. The narrative was shifting. The public didn't want a robot. They wanted a hero. A devoted family man was better for business than a lonely tycoon. "Fine," the chairman grunted, closing the dossier. "The family man angle tests well with key demographics. Keep your seat, Adrian, but fix your tie." 3 months later, the setting was a courtroom again. But the contrast was absolute. There was no rain pounding against the windows. The room was bathed in golden sunlight. There was no cruel judge or ticking clock, just a smiling magistrate and a piece of paper that changed everything. Adrian sat next to Leo, his large hand guiding the boy's small fingers as they signed the document together. "Is it real now?" Leo asked, looking up with wide, hopeful eyes. "It's real." Adrian smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "You are Leo Vance. And I am your dad. Forever. Elena watched them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The nightmare of the gavel was gone, replaced by the stroke of a pen that knit them together legally, just as they had been knit together emotionally for months. That night, the mansion was quiet. It wasn't the cold silence of a museum but the peaceful hush of a home. Elena leaned against the doorframe of Leo's room. Adrian was curled awkwardly onto the small bed, reading The Velveteen Rabbit. Leo was fast asleep against his chest, clutching his old teddy bear, but he didn't need the bear for comfort anymore. He had a father. Adrian closed the book gently, careful not to wake the boy. He kissed Leo's forehead and looked up to meet Elena's gaze. The look that passed between them was heavy with a love that had survived the storm. He stood up and walked to her, wrapping her in his arms in the hallway. "We made it," she whispered into his chest, the scent of sandalwood and safety surrounding her. "We did," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "No more deadlines, no more contracts, just us." The 24-hour countdown that had started in terror had ended in a lifetime of peace. The single mom who had fought the world for her son had found her protector. And the billionaire who had everything had finally found the only thing he was missing. They were home. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that even the coldest contracts can turn into the warmest homes, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Like this video so more people can find hope in unexpected places. And subscribe if you want more stories that feel like a warm hug on a cold day. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of your heart.